Hey guys, welcome back to Teen Muscle Radio and episode number 29. So today we are very, very lucky to be joined by Dr. Scott Stevenson. And Scott is an applied exercise physiologist and he also has a PhD. Now, also alongside this, Scott has got to the level where he's been training athletes like David Henry, who recently took to the stage at the Arnold Classic and placed an amazing second. Arguably, from some points of view, he would have been placed first. In my opinion, I think he should have been. But yeah, also Scott is a very accomplished bodybuilder within the NPC, taking 4 overall titles. Awesome physique. And a guy that's got, so much experience, which is why I sort of contacted Scott initially, because I've been following him for a while and just looking at his training methods. It's definitely, some of the things are a little unorthodox, and I'm sure that we'll crack into sort of some of them today. So Scott, Thanks very much for coming on and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, this is especially because, as we just talked about, you've got a bit of a younger audience. This is especially important to me. I ask the question in the gym all the time, like, so how long have you been training? And most of the time, to sort of convey that, it really hits home with people. I'll say, well, how old are you?
Yeah.
And the guy might say, oh, I'm 28. I said, well, I started 7 years before you were born.
Yeah, I know.
So it's nice to be able to take that information. It's so important and convey that, pay it forward, really.
Absolutely.
That's super important to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, natural or assisted bodybuilding, like either or, it's like a old man sport. Like the best people in the game are older. They're more mature. They've put down the foundations and they've stayed consistent. Like you look at obviously there's top pros coming up now that are younger and that have had maybe more years of knowledgeable training behind them, but the majority, especially within the natural scene, like some of the best bodybuilders are like in their late 30s, early 40s. So it's definitely about playing the long term for sure. So Scott, if you could sort of give the listeners a bit of background about yourself in terms of how you initially got into the industry, and then obviously how that transferred to getting to the level that you are now, obviously prepping athletes as high as David Henry. That must have taken quite some time to get to that level, and also obviously how you've developed what is Fortitude Training, and I'd like to sort of know more about your background.
Okay. I was just your regular old meathead. I was just a kid. I started reading Muscle and Fitness Flex magazine. I collected them as a kid, thinking these are going to be jewels of information. Yeah. I can have this incredible library for the future. I've since thrown all those away, except a couple keepsakes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to lift weights actually as long as I could remember. My mom wouldn't let me because she thought it might stunt my growth.
Yeah.
And you can't blame her. She's looking after her son. So I did that for sports throughout high school, throughout college. I kept on lifting despite I had a pretty fully enriched college experience and everything you possibly could in college. And I got done with college, and through sort of a twist of fate, I ended up going to study exercise science, exercise physiology, because I just figured, what do I love? What I really like doing? What can I make a career out of too? And that was the one that made sense.
Yep.
So just kept doing that. Just kept kind of following my passion. So I got a master's degree. I realized how much I love to teach. I need to get a PhD if I want to continue to do this. Yep. And I realized how much I love learning. That just almost an addiction to it. It's really, I'm a perpetual student. I love the process of digging into information. Yeah. So that just kept me going. And that's sort of where I've been continually. I'm always looking into things. Something pops up I don't know. I tell people this a lot of times. Some of the smartest people I've known say, and I do the same thing, is if you don't know something, you look it up. And then you look up something else, you'll find something else you don't understand. You can continue on a tangent for hours. Yeah. I do that. I trace those back as far as I possibly can, and then repeat that when I don't, if I don't remember something, because I'll forget things and I have to look them up again. Mm-hmm. So I started competing in the late 90s.
Okay.
So I was in my late 20s at that point, actually.
Oh wow, okay, a bit of a late broom to the bodybuilding stage, I guess.
In a way, yeah. I mean, I did some pretty intense training in college.
Yeah, no, sure.
There's a program called Cybergenics,
Oh,
which probably
no, I've
never
never
heard
heard of
of.
it. Yeah.
It's still the hardest thing I've ever done.
Wow.
Absolutely insane. I mean, this is an example. It was one of the first programs to say like this kit
Yeah.
of supplements, which
Okay.
probably did nothing in the context of it all. For instance, when training, just the first exercise for legs,
Yeah.
you do squats. You pick about a 6-8 rep max.
Okay.
Go to failure, and then you'd have your partner assist you with negatives until you could no longer do a controlled negative at
Wow.
all. Drop the weight down to another weight you can do 6 to 8 reps. Do that again, positive negative failure. One more time, positive negative failure. Then step out of the rack and start doing jumps, like deep jumps until you no longer
Wow.
jump off the ground. And then you do deep knee bends with body weight until you can no longer stand up under your own volition. And then you would assist yourself up until you can no longer lower yourself, until you can no longer stand. And then you would do a contraction, an all-out contraction.
Wow.
You do that 5 times,
Wow.
and that's just squats. So that's the sort of mentality I had, as a few screws loose type of
Yeah.
teen.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, so I did some heavy training, but because of graduate school, I never got into competing until my late 20s.
Okay.
I met Dave actually in the gym. It was just completely fortuitous. It
Ah,
was,
okay, cool. That's a nice story.
yeah, I think it was a Smith machine. It was about 2003, I think. And he wanted to use it, and I was on it, or vice versa.
Yeah.
We just started chatting. And the time I had looked into doing dog crap training, which is some of
DC
your
training.
listeners may be at DC
Yeah,
training.
yeah, yeah.
I had come to almost all the same conclusions that Dante had with my own training. I wasn't doing rest pause sets.
Okay.
I was
Okay.
doing everything. I'm like, okay, this is kind of eerie. I'm reading this. I'm like, this is what I'm doing this. I'm doing this. I'm doing this. Everything was fitting together almost exactly. So I started doing that.
Uh-huh.
And that's when Dave became known for doing dog crap training. And I followed along with Dave and eventually became a DC trainer. Dante was like, well, you know the system as well as anybody.
Yeah.
I did it for nearly a decade.
Wow, okay.
And that was part of what led to Fortitude Training.
Okay.
Ante got really burnt out, didn't really want to have to do it. He really pushed himself, helping everyone he possibly could.
Yeah.
And he sort of fried out that empathy center in his brain, I think, to a certain degree. He still helps a lot of people.
Yeah, no,
He
sure.
really does. And I developed Fortitude Training based on a lot of things that I learned there and the research that I've been reading about. So high frequency training, some of the things that I had done when playing around with dog crap training, some of the things that came from injuries. For
Yeah,
instance,
okay.
as an example, I don't think I've talked about this before. I don't remember. I was doing something. I got a small tear in one of my triceps. Of
Okay.
course,
Okay.
that hampers you from doing overhead presses, chest presses. I was having trouble even doing pull downs, that sorts of thing, because I think it was in the long head, actually
Okay.
partially in the long head at least.
Okay.
So in order to rehab that, I had to start doing really low load stuff so I wouldn't re-tear.
Mm.
High rep sets.
Yep.
And I recognized after doing it, it's like, oh my gosh, my triceps are actually
Great.
getting better than they were before, aside from the tear.
Yeah, yeah.
That kind of turned me on to the idea of metabolic stress. This was like a decade ago or so.
Wow, okay, yeah, long time ago.
Yeah, so that's like one piece when I'm reading of the research about metabolic stress, and playing around with these ideas in the gym and training weak muscle groups with higher frequency, which a lot of people have done.
Yep.
And I started putting all those things together, and I recognized from doing all the training I've been doing that volume recovery in general is highly, highly variable.
Yep.
So I knew a system that would adjust to that would be necessary.
Okay.
So I was interested in high frequency seemed to work. Variability of stimulus in terms of the load. So heavy loading on one end. I mean, slag iron, as Dante likes to call it, picking up big stuff, core lifts, deadlifts, partial deadlifts,
Yep.
squats, presses, dips, those sorts of things are going to work. If you get extraordinarily strong, you find someone who's squatting 500 pounds for 10 reps, they're going to have big legs pretty much.
Yeah, yeah.
They may not be have Tom Platz level legs, but they're going to have big legs in the general sense.
Yeah.
And they'll have gotten larger legs in getting from 2 1/4 for 10 or 12 to 495 for 10 or 12.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's quintessential. Some sort of a progressive overload has to happen, but that can happen in different rep ranges.
Sure, of course.
And it also makes sense if you're getting older that you adjust your rep ranges depending on how your joints are doing to a certain degree to avoid the risk of injury, especially if you've gotten stronger.
Yep.
Risk of injury goes up when you start doing, 600-pound, 700-pound rack deads, and you're 43 and you've been doing those since you were 13. Heavy loading for 30 years. Yeah. It's like, okay, you have to pay very, very close attention to what you're doing and how your form and those sorts of things, because the nagging injuries will come in.
Absolutely.
So loading, focusing on metabolic stress and different ways to load the muscle was very important.
Okay.
Some form of periodization is absolutely vital.
Okay.
And what Dante had folks do and what I had done, what really works, as long as someone's not overly OCD about it, and they can actually do this, is some form of auto-regulation.
Yeah.
Where they can recognize, I need to take a step back. I need to have some sort of a deload here. What I do in Fortitude Training is an intensive cruise.
Okay.
And we can talk about that. It's a form of a taper.
Sure, okay.
Science strongly suggests that. And that actually fixed a problem with Dante, where he would do a blast and cruise. And I've retained those terms and given him credit. In Fortitude Training, you do a progressive blast where you're trying to progressively overload.
Yep.
An intensive cruise, which is different than what Dante had people do. He allowed them to do sort of whatever, various options, whatever suited them. And some people would take 2 weeks off, do nothing.
Okay. Yeah.
Destroyed themselves. And what would happen sometimes is those folks would come back and they'd taken 2 steps forward, and they come back after their cruise and they'd have taken a step back.
Yeah.
Be weaker, and to spend half of the next blast just getting back to where they once were.
Yeah.
And I wanted to correct that, and I really think I have with the way I do the intensive cruising. Mm-hmm. One of the other things that fits into Fortitude Training, and I've got a whole camp that I do with this where I kind of explain this in detail, is that the research strongly suggests, it's kind of a cool line of reasoning, that the muscle has a capability of recovering to a much larger extent than the nervous system, the endocrine system, the immune system. Yeah. So the muscle can grow under extreme forms of duress, and this comes from animal models, where you can do things to force muscle growth that you really couldn't do with an individual. No individual would sacrifice themselves to that sort of a procedure. Yet phenomenal muscle growth above and beyond what weight training can produce. If you look at the animal models of weight training compared to the human models, you get about the same time course and extent of muscle growth. And then when you apply, so that sort of gives you some logic that suggests that muscle in rats grows in the same way that muscle in humans does. Sorry.
That's right.
It might happen a couple times.
That's
happens
cool.
a lot. It's very, they keep me protected. So there's the line of reasoning is that muscle in rats or the animal models that mimic weight training grows to the same extent that you see with weight training in human studies. Yep. So when you apply these animal models like compensatory hypertrophy, you, for instance, remove a soleus muscle, one of the plantar flexors, and you watch the gastroc grow, and it'll increase, muscle size and, many times faster and to a much larger extent. You actually get hyperplasia in those situations too. Okay. That such a sort of thing could be possible in humans, but you're not going to take out the soleus of a bunch of bodybuilders just to make the gastroc. You're not going to do it. Yeah. So that's just the muscle can recover, but you couldn't train in that way. You couldn't, continually overload your body all day long, like stay in the gym and lift continuously, which is kind of what, because your nervous system would break down, your immune system, you'd get sick, your endocrine system, you'd overtrain. So I've then figured out, at least this is in the gym type of technique. But what I found in particular is that going to failure, like a true momentary muscular failure where that last rep, you're about to bleed from your eyes type of failure. Those are the ones that really cut into your nervous system recovery and the other aspect of recovery. So, you can do, 3 sets of 9 with that 10th rep being a failure one, and just stop a rep or two short and you might get 27 reps with that load
Yeah.
over those 3 sets. But if you took those three you might get 10 in the first one, then you might drop to 8 and 7 because of the failure, because of what that does, the inroads that it creates on your nervous system.
Yeah.
So you might end up with roughly the same amount of loading on the muscle in terms of reps times load, but the inroads into your nervous system can be much greater when you hit failure a lot.
Sure.
Failure has its advantages for programming. You want to be able to know this is a maximal effort. This is the best I could get. I did it with 200 pounds. Next time I'm going to try 205 pounds. So that's a very, very important tool, I think, at least, for progressing your training. But you want to be careful in how you do that, because then you'll cut into your ability to recover from your training and come back and do it again. So one of the ways I do that is having, depending on the volume tier you're using with Fortitude Training, if you're doing multiple sets, only the last one would go to failure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the previous ones, and powerlifters do that all the time.
Yeah.
Powerlifters don't want to fail.
Yeah.
They don't want to miss a lift because you're practicing missing a lift.
Yep.
And then also I have people do continuous sets. So to bring up DC training again, there's a set type in dog crap training called a widowmaker.
Okay.
Where the idea is that, if you were married, you would be basically trying to kill yourself and thus make your wife a widow. So people should look at you when you're doing these, think this guy's out of his mind. He's trying to commit suicide under the squat bar. So you do a number of reps, and then you take a break and bang out a few more reps and take a break, take some breaths, and you try to extend the set to get as many reps as you possibly could, like your life depends upon it, like it's a gun to your head. You have to keep getting reps.
Okay.
But doing that destroys you. It's a great way to grow, but you can only do so many of those.
Yeah.
But what you can do is accumulate some volume in your training by doing continuous repetitions and avoiding that stop and go. Because each time you stop, you're getting close to failure, and you're inching away at those inroads, and then you take a break, and then you do that again, as opposed to just one continuous repetition, basically straight connecting all your straight set with no pauses in there, a continuous flow of reps. And that causes, it's a bit different to do that if you're not used to it, because you want to stop.
Yep.
Your mental mechanisms say, okay, I want to stop because I'm going to get to 10 reps here. It'd be easier if I stopped at 8 and then did 2 singles. You just want to keep going. And once you get used to that, it does end up having fewer inroads. It does make it a little bit easier in terms of recovery to do that. So those are two things I built into the system.
Sure.
There's auto-regulation in terms of the exercises you choose.
Okay.
So if, for instance, you've done an incline press earlier in the week and come to the gym, some of the different set types that I have, you just basically sort of wing it to a certain degree.
Okay.
You can go in the gym and say, well, I really like this exercise. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to bang away at it and progress with that week after week.
Yep.
Or you could say, well, you know what? I'm not going to do an incline machine because I just did incline and my incline chest is just whacked. There's no point in that. Yeah. I've already got plenty of stimulus there, plenty to adapt from. I'm going to do something different. That also fits in well with injury as well.
Yeah.
Because you don't go in and say, well, I got to do squats even though my knees are killing me. That's why I think a lot of older guys can't do squats anymore, is they thought you have to do squats if you want big legs.
Yeah.
Just do squats, for years and years and years, and eventually they just destroy their knees. Whereas if they just use pain as a guide, and which you might call common sense, I can train heavy, I can train hard on other exercises that don't destroy my knees. So that auto-regulation fits in with the exercises that you choose.
Okay.
It fits in with how much volume you do. I have different volume tiers. So I'm on tier 1, 2, or 3. Yeah. And you adjust depending on how you feel. If you were just had a really rough work week, and you didn't sleep very much, you didn't eat very well, you're not going to be able to recover from a higher tier. So you just drop things down. Okay. So I think those are all and of course the duration of your blast too. Okay.
Yeah, that's going to be individual variability. Isn't
it? Totally. I mean, most people won't go past 6 weeks the way I have it set up.
Okay, that shows how intense it is, because obviously you can run other training programs for 8 or 9 weeks with quite a long run, and then be able to to sort of deload off that. But 6 weeks seems quite short.
Right. Yeah, it does. I mean, I've seen people go 8, but typically 6 is all you want. The other thing that's interesting, well, here's why I'm not worried about that, because you blast for a period and then you take a cruise, and you have to sort of figure out for yourself when it's time to take that cruise.
Okay.
But that cruise is a taper.
Yeah.
So you switch only to a certain type of set type. In Fortitude Training, it's a form of a cluster set.
Okay.
So it's like a rest pause set in dog crap, but it's called a muscle round.
Yeah,
and people,
I've seen them, yep.
Yeah, a lot of people putting up all over the place. So you just do those, and when you do those, of course, you choose the exercise you want, but those are still brutal. You're still training hard, but you drop your volume down.
Yeah, okay.
So like swimmers are really renowned for doing this. A lot of endurance athletes, even American football players, they won't have like a crazy workout the day before a game.
Yeah.
There's some sort of taper, so you get a super compensatory effect.
Yeah.
So basically the cruise is set up with 2/3 of that time, and the duration of the cruise is based on how long you blasted. So you blasted for 6 weeks, you're going to need about a 2-week cruise. If you blasted for 3 weeks, you need about a 1-week cruise. And when people come back, they've super compensated. And this is
the progress they've made. Yeah.
It's functional overreaching is the term that's used in the overtraining literature.
Yeah.
So you didn't overreach or overtrain to the point like, okay, now I just screwed myself. I mean, I've lost performance, and I got to rest up. Yeah, you've just pushed a little bit enough to where you're going to create an adaptation when you back off, but you keep the intensity high, the volume just less. And that's what I think, this is what the research shows when they actually test this, is that those two things are vital for creating this overreaching effect.
Amazing, yeah.
So, yeah.
I think, what do you, in terms of when you get to a cruise, obviously I know that with Fortitude Training, obviously you coach people directly, but with some of the Fortitude Training principles, you can purchase almost like an ebook. Now, in the ebook, do you give, what's your sort of general recommendations as to what someone should feel like prior to cruising? Because quite a lot of people are always confused, and I get a few questions, I'm sure you get hundreds, but as to when I should deload or when it's right to back off. What general feelings or signs do you have people measure when they need to cruise?
It's a really good question. First of all, it's going to be between 3 and 6 weeks for, I would say, 90% of the people, if they're training. And the reason I can say that is the way I've set up the different set types. You have to train hard. You can't lollygag through the training program and do muscle rounds the way they're set up, because you're going to push and you're going to progressively overload on what are called loading sets. Okay. So the program constrains you to hard training, and that's relative to you. So you don't want to go to the point where you're feeling overtrained. Okay. Typically, like where you get up, you have difficulty sleeping, you may have an elevated heart rate. The overtraining literature with resistance training is very, very scant. Yeah. I mean, the typical testosterone to cortisol ratio indicators, you can look at heart rate variability, all these sorts of things haven't really been studied in the context of resistance training all that much. But those are things to definitely avoid. If your appetite's going really, really down, and this is different than what it would have been had you been eating that much in another program. Because a lot of people are just eating so much food, it's no wonder they're not hungry. You can't blame that on the training, it's just the amount of food. Motivation to train is huge. Sometimes just getting a pump in the gym can be one too. That may be one of the things that, and I note this in the book, that's pretty interesting, is that especially with highly damaging exercise, and this is one thing that will cause that elevation in metabolic rate, EPOC, excess post-exercise and oxygen consumption, that can last for over a day when it comes to really brutal resistance exercise, is that the damage in the muscle really creates a high energy demand, and it also impairs your ability to load glycogen. So if you don't have much glycogen, you're not going to get a very good pump. So someone who over the course of weeks has been training frequently, and you train most muscle groups 3 times a week. in Fortitude Training. 4 in one of the versions. There's a basic and a turbo version.
Wow. Okay.
So if you're not recovering and the muscle is staying damaged, then you're not going to load glycogen very well. You're going to feel that in the gym, and that's going to have a psychological. You're like, man, I'm just sore everywhere, and I got this achy, almost flu-like feeling.
Yeah.
That right there is like, okay, you need to cruise. You need to like go right into your cruise. Take a couple of days off of training altogether, execute the cruise as you typically would. It's going to be 2 or 3, maybe 4 training sessions for a week, and then some days off, completely off at the end.
Okay.
So those sorts of things, appetite, sleep. I actually have a perceived recovery scale that I give to people sometimes as well.
And if those markers are going up, obviously it's time to maybe cruise.
Or down, yeah, if the numbers go down. Yes, down. Of course.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that's something someone uses as a guide. So it's a hard thing, especially if you're making good gains.
Yeah, it is.
So like, I'm kicking butt. I'm beating the logbook every time I go in on most, if not all, of my exercises. And I want to keep doing this. And people will just bang away. The other thing that people can do too is if they're using a particular volume tier, you can adjust that.
Okay.
So it's like I've been at volume tier 3. Some people will do this. It makes for a really nice program flexibility because some people know when they first come back, it takes a while to get in the groove. So they start with volume tier 1 and then they build up to 1 and then 2 and then maybe even 3 for a week. And then they realize, okay, 3 really pushed me, but if I drop back to 2, that next week I can recover. And they extend their period of progress out with the blast until they have a cruise. Whereas others are like, I took that week off. That week worked great for me. This is just individuality. Everyone's a little bit different,
Yeah, sure.
And they'll start off with 2 or 3, and they'll just bang into it, and then they'll drop their volume tiers down and almost use the second portion of the tier of their blast, as a prolonged taper.
Yeah.
And then when they sort of wean their way into the actual intensive cruise where they do have a true taper.
Yeah.
So. But sometimes it's just you just screw it up. Sometimes you're like, okay, I pushed too hard, man. I need to know, I can't go 6 weeks. There's no way. It's going to have to be 4.
Yeah.
And even if you go 3 and you really pushed it, it's a week-long intensive cruise, and you're going to train about 2/3 of that time. So you're just taking like one workout off.
Yeah.
And you're going to get stronger. If you've gone 3 weeks, almost everyone's going to come back with an overreaching effect of some sort just by taking a day off. Everyone listening, I presume, knows this. Like, as long as it wasn't a day like that was during a weekend of binging on alcohol or what have you.
Yeah, or underfeeding or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You're going to come back better in the day off. And I suggest people do that too if they need to with Fortitude Training. Just like if something happened, you're up all night long because you had a baby that was crying or whatever, then you just take a day off. Be smart about it. Pick up where you left.
I think that's awesome. That's obviously why you've got the results that you have with this sort of protocol and approach, is because that's like auto-regulation is somewhat, I think, like overlooked in a lot of other programming tools where people just don't essentially listen to themselves enough. But at the same time, I think, and I'm sure that you'll back this up, it's like people can almost, take the piss with auto-regulation, because if they're not willing to push themselves as hard as they need to, they'll never realistically tap into the progress that they could have. So I guess another one of my questions to you was, like, you seem to very much push the idea of intensity and how important intensity is, and you use the sort of the phrase "earn it," which I really like. And I'm just wondering as to how, especially in the ebook as well, or when you give out protocols, how do you sort of give people guidance as to how they're going to push that hard? Or is there any sort of like tools or, I guess, cues for people to know when they've achieved the correct level of intensity within the approach that you're doing?
Some of that is just going to be inherent to the individual.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I like I said, I tried to build it into the program. So let's say if you're on the highest volume tier and you're training thighs. Okay. So you're on volume tier 3. Yep. Someone would pick a compound exercise, and then they'd intersperse between the 3 sets of that exercise with 2 isolation exercises. So you might do a squat, a knee extension, squat, hamstring curl, squat.
Okay.
Only that last set of the squats is taken to failure. So what is failure? I mean, literally, what does that mean for everybody? It's just as hard as you can go.
Yeah.
It's all you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you a story. I was thinking about videoing the set, but I didn't. When I was in Columbus, it was really cold there, and I still had these sniffles that were coming on, and I started to get a bloody nose. I just got a crack somewhere up my nose, and I blow my nose and start to bleed. And I've been supplementing with a lot of omega-3s and eating a lot of salmon. That thins my blood considerably. This has always happened to me, just because I was just to fight off inflammation and you know, all the achy and creaky. So my nose will start bleeding. And so I've told a couple people this story because must have looked absolutely ridiculous when I did it. And I'm not doing this. Sounds like, oh God, he's going to toot his horn about how hardcore he is. But when my nose started bleeding during this set of actually Smith squats, so I could go to failure and not worry about it. It's just my nose bleeding. It didn't bother me. You know, it's like whatever. So I had a bunch of weight on the bar, and I ended up doing a set of 10. And my nose was bleeding the entire time. You know, it was bleeding down into my mouth. My mouth was filling with blood. I was having to swallow the blood. It was like pretty nasty. It was like a horror flick. If you're squeamish, you would have been like, oh my God, this guy's out of his mind. And I just, I did what I had to do, and I cleaned up, and I was good to go. But that's because I've been doing those sorts of sets in a way that most people don't want to do for decades.
Yeah.
Because I'm stupid. I like that. I enjoy that. And that's part of my mentality. That was there with me from the very get-go. I really like training hard from the very beginning. Some people don't like that.
Yeah. Some
people, that's not their, I like to say, okay, I'm going to see what I can possibly do. I wrote an article for Elite FDS. I think it was Rust-Proofing the Iron Warrior, I think is the name of it.
Okay.
And I talk about, it's a good article. It's just some things about sort of enhancing your longevity. Topical, like Quan Luang oil is a topical that it's anti-inflammatory.
I've seen Jordan use that, Jordan Peters.
Right, yeah, Jordan loves it. So... And in that article, I talk about, the things that happen when you train really hard. You may end up bleeding. You may shit yourself. You may pass out. You pop the vessels in your eyes. All that kind of stuff. And that's just how that's really not the most logical thing to do.
No.
So that's one end of the spectrum. That's where some people want to go because they like that. It's fun. Some people want to jump out of airplanes. Yeah. Some people like to throw a parachute out and then dive after it and get it. Like they like to thrill that much, like the James Bond movie.
Yeah.
Some people are like, I'm not even going up in an airplane because that scares them. So everyone's different. I can't, especially online, tell someone, hey, I want you to go, until you think you're going to die.
Yeah.
And that's all relative. I mean, sometimes I'll say, there are visualization techniques you can use. If someone really wants to go there, you can say, there's lots of ways you can do this. There's a number of them. Some of them are tapping into releasing some of the negative things that you've experienced in your life.
Yeah.
Things that maybe be frustrations or angers, things that make you angry that you want to tap into, and you can release them in quote unquote a more healthy way. You could also be reinforcing that anger if you bring that up a lot. And you stay an angry person because you keep having angry thoughts. Yeah. That's not a good thing. The other thing you can do is think about, oh my gosh, how incredibly lucky am I that I'm among the wealthiest in the world, that I can go and buy these supplements and have this luxury where I actually force myself to do labor because I'm trying to create some aesthetic with my body, whereas most of the world has to do manual labor. And their bodies are breaking down because of the things they've been doing on a daily basis, and they may be struggling just to have enough food.
Yeah.
If you have perspective in that way, you go in the gym and say, gosh, I'm so thankful for what I have. That's motivating. It's like, wow, I better get after it. I'm not going to go in here and pussyfoot around and play with my phone and talk to people. I've got a real genuine opportunity here. I've only got so many years I can do this to see what I can do. I'm going to at least pay tribute to the blessing that has brought me to the point I'm just born into the right situation.
Yeah.
So that's a very positive way to look at it.
Yep.
And everyone's motivated by different things. There's positive and negative. You can create visualization exercises. I'll tell people these. Sometimes, if the logbooks, you got 8 reps previously,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get 10. Literally, you close your eyes and you see it from start to finish.
Yeah.
What happens?
That, yeah.
I step up. What happens to my mindset when I flip the switch? If that's what people like to do, the noise that you make, but like even having a little guttural, growl you'll get people pumped up.
Yeah.
And how that first rep feels when you power the first one up, just almost effortlessly, and then especially how that feels at the very end when you're thinking, my body wants to stop, but there's no way my mind's going to give up on this. Mm-hmm. I'm going to just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep. So you see all that in your head,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just step up and do it.
Yeah.
It's already, you just done it. It's literally, and I've actually written another article for Elite FTS on this notion too.
Yeah.
So there's some good research showing that can have a performance enhancing effect.
Yeah.
Those visualization techniques.
Yeah.
I
like
a good
that
training
a lot.
partner. I tell people, if you can't train hard enough, then find someone who's bigger than you, someone who'll make you, pardon my French, make you his bitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or make you her bitch. And maybe women train hard.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
If you're a guy who's like I'm not gonna let her beat me type of mentality, if that works for you, then train with a woman because she's gonna kick your butt. Yeah. Probably, she may not lift the same loads if she's smaller, but she's gonna lift relative, especially on legs, as much or more than you, very very likely. Mm-hmm. When I trained with Dave, and Dave Henry and I were training partners initially. We trained for like 10 years together in Arizona.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Mm-hmm.
It was also kept my mindset straight because I'd be training with Dave, and I go and watch a video of Ronnie Coleman over. I'm like, I'm not that impressed. Just train with this guy. Look at this. Really. And then I realized I'm no way is my physique anywhere near Dave's. So it always kept me humble. But Dave and I were competitive. Dave was always stronger than me on chest for sure and presses mostly. And back I could hang with him on. Back we were really close. And then legs I could get him most of the time. And that's just where we were. So he was coming after me on legs, and I was trying to hang with him on chest, and on back we were using the same weight, a lot of things, rep by rep. So that was great. That was a perfect training dynamic with a training partner. So there's training partners.
Yeah.
We could spend a whole podcast talking about that.
I know. It's incredible. I think that personally, and what I've seen with people that I've worked with or people even just in the gym is it is sort of quite mindset related, and that's purely personal. I think you've got to know where your good place is in terms of tapping into where you perform at your best. Like you said, I've tried that whole approach of trying to tap into anger or trying to tap into bad thing that's happened or something or a bad day that I've had. I always seem to perform worse when I do that. And it's the same when I try and hype myself up too much with rock music or loud dubstep or anything massively loud and distracting, especially when doing something like a squat where the technical side of the lift is quite high and I have to think about the movement. It distracts me way too much, and I prefer to just be in tune with the movement. And sometimes that involves listening to the crap gym music and just focusing. Right. But yeah, I totally agree. I think just finding your environment where you do well. I totally relate to you on the training partner side of things as well. I think training with someone that's slightly better than you in some aspects with some lifts is great because you chase them. And the same goes for even just having other people in your gym that are performing way better than you, because I remember a time when I trained in a gym where no one was doing. I was probably one of the best in there. I was probably one of the strongest in there, and that wasn't a great environment for me. Now I'm in a gym where I saw a guy who's actually coached by Jordan, funnily enough, who was squatting 190 for 15 reps the other day, high bar, and it looked easy. And I was like, what the hell? I'd never seen that before. And that motivated the shit out of me. So things like that, I think being in a great environment or being in a a bodybuilding style gym is going to definitely send you in the right direction. For sure.
There's an inverted U from the scientific perspective. There's an inverted U type of dose response in terms of arousal and performance.
Yeah.
That fits the different types of performances, whether it's to the extent to which it's skill or just amount of absolute motor output.
Yeah.
So you get too aroused, like if you're about to go and try to take apart your phone and you ordered a new lens and you're gonna have to take apart your iPhone with the little. You don't want to be aroused for that. Like getting psyched up to do that is not going to help. It's way more than you want. You'd be dropping the screws all over the place, and then you get really pissed off. So like with you, exactly what you said with squats is too much of a skill component. You get overly aroused and you just become just like this spasmodic lifter who just doesn't do well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very, very true.
Absolutely. Cool. So Scott, I'm also quite inclined to ask your opinions on sort of whether Fortitude Training and the intensity that it provides. I know there's different tiers, but have you seen sort of any examples of drug-free athletes using Fortitude Training to their advantages and really getting good results out of it? And do you see large recovery ability differences between enhanced athletes and drug-free athletes? Or have you seen maybe some examples of drug-free athletes that have really shocked you and gone up to like the top tier and progressed really well? I'm not sure how many sort of natural athletes you work with, but yeah, have you got any examples?
The whole program was set up without any
variability.
Like there's no mention of super supplementation of steroid use in the book at all. It's all about fitting with your own level of recovery. Now, steroids of course will help.
Yeah,
I mean, that generally is a trump card, so to speak. It moves you to a higher level.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, I'm trying to get at all your questions. The interesting thing is, I mean, I've had clients. I have one client who dieted down on the highest volume tier. Yeah. Natural the whole way.
Wow, that's interesting.
The whole thing. Yeah. And that's his recovery level.
Yep.
And then, I've had other clients and other people I know who weren't, and they volume tier 1, the lowest one, works for them. Mm-hmm. And that's just that's a matter of their individual constitution, so to speak, as well as how hard they train. And one thing to consider too is a lot of times guys who are enhanced are going to be lifting heavier loads.
Yeah.
So that's greater taxation. And you see that over the course of time. Jordan and I talked about this not too long ago too, because he's extraordinarily strong.
Yeah, agreed.
And in the UK, Dorian Yates was a prime example of this. He had to adjust his volume down the stronger he got because of the inroads that it creates. Mm-hmm. So there's so much overlap among individuals. There's so much variation among individuals and then there's so much overlap, enhanced versus non-enhanced, that it really almost makes no difference. Take in the broad scheme of things.
Yeah.
I think if you looked, at a group, obviously if you took someone who was not enhanced and then enhanced them, they're going to have greater recovery. Mm-hmm. But they're also going to get stronger at a more rapid rate, and that's probably going to impact what they can recover from.
Yep.
As well.
Yep.
So it may end up, I mean, my sense is that I would not be surprised if it's a wash that way. Because, I mean, you also know, especially, for instance, with orals, that the impact on aggression can be there.
Okay.
There's a central effect. Mm-hmm. Like powerlifters, for instance, will use like something like halotestin. Okay. And that will have it has a very acute effect. Jordan's mentioned some of these things too. Some orals he's used sort of as a pre-workout. Okay. And that's pretty common use. So there is an effect there. That in and of itself is it's like adding jet fuel. It's adding turbo to your training. So you train harder. Yep. But then that's a greater stimulus, but it also requires a greater amount of recovery in order to harness that stimulus for an adaptation. Mm-hmm. So that's a really good question, but people do really well. Most of the people, I have a discussion board that goes along with the book. If someone buys the book, they just got to send me their transaction ID from the purchase over on board, integrativebodybuilding.com. Okay. They'll see the discussion board there. And then they get free access. They get a free subscription as long as I'm alive and still doing the board. I answer questions every day on there. Yeah. And There's a bunch of logs. Gosh, I mean, I should have. I just read them and I just smile. I don't know how many. Probably like literally at least 100 personal messages or posts. Like I started Fortitude Training, and these are the best gains that I've made. You know, in like sometimes in decades. Yeah. This sort of stuff. And of course, people aren't going to message me and say, you know, I started Fortitude Training. It sucks. You know, I'm not going to get the messages. So this isn't exactly a random sampling of opinions. Yeah. But I'm hearing that a lot, and I'm hearing it a lot from people who are not enhanced.
That's awesome.
And that makes sense too. The other thing I thought of when I knew you were going to bring this question up is that being enhanced, especially, and this I think applies to some of your listeners who may be younger, is you basically are missing out on some of the important knowledge that can be obtained if you start off at an early age, that you're only going to get when you're training natural, because you have to have all your ducks in a row. And you have to be very sensitive to the impact of diet and sleep and supplements, non-super supplements, on your progress. And that's how you learn. You learn tremendous that way. And then you can band-aid, of course, all sorts of dietary and recovery mistakes with super supplements. This, you've heard this a million times. I'm sure you've talked about it here before. So you end up, let's say someone who wants a certain level of development, and they can literally pretty much get that if they up the dose, if they use enough. Well, then where's their desire to learn? Where's their desire to? They've already achieved what they want. And then a lot of times the ego is obviously involved. This is a very egotistical and, of course, narcissistic pursuit in many ways. So now they've satisfied that. Where's their drive? Like they're the biggest dude in the gym. People are always like, oh my God, looking at this guy and like asking like, how'd you get so big and what do you eat? And you know, you've quenched all those things that would otherwise be fueling your desire to better inform yourself and learn more. So what you've done now is you're like, well, shit. I've seen this many times. I've been around since the beginning of the internet and decade before that or more. People will then be like, okay, now I've gotten to this level. I don't know what there's a psychological, you can call it addiction. You know, there's an addiction to a certain degree. It's like, okay, that's where I've gotten, and then what do you do after that? Like, if you want to like go back and be natural now, then you have to deal with the fact of how much better you looked in the past. Can you do that? And a lot of guys will not. Like, what's your long-term goal here? So. And I'll take the other situation, someone who trains for 10 or 15 years, and they do everything they possibly can. They got all their I's dotted, T's crossed, ducks are all lined up, and they know a tremendous amount about their body. And they're like, okay, you know, maybe I know I'm in my 30s, and my testosterone levels are declining, and they decide to add something to that, and that will continue their progress. And if it's a small enough amount, it's something that's not going to tremendously, at least, and maybe not at all, it may improve their health. There are lots of reasons that hormone replacement can improve health. Like actually can improve your blood cholesterol levels in someone who's previously hypogonadal. Then you've got a way to continue doing what you love, and you're so good at knowing how to keep your diet and your other supplementation, everything on track, that you don't have to use a whole bunch of stuff. And if you come off and just go to hormone replacement when you're in your 40s or 50s, you're still going to look awesome. That's a hard thing to think about when you're 20 years old and indestructible. But it's like you can almost say to yourself, well, I can give myself, from the bodybuilding perspective, a frontal lobotomy and basically prevent myself from knowing as much about bodybuilding as I possibly could and just start using. Or I can learn as much as I possibly can, and then I'll know a hell of a lot more and educate myself about super supplements in the meantime, and then I can make that decision. And then I have all the tools to maintain a really, really good physique if I decide to let that go. Otherwise, you may never get those tools. You may have bypassed your opportunity. It's like you have one-time opportunity for a library card, and if you pass it up, there may not be another chance. You can't get back in there and learn again. You can't be in that initial learning phase after you've used super supplements. For many people, not everyone, but it's something I've seen time and time and time again. Those people just vanish. They
Yeah.
come, oh, I mean, literally, the internet was, in the late 90s, early 90s, it started having news groups and then discussion boards. And I can go, and this is when some of your listeners where they were in cribs, maybe, if they're
Yeah.
teenagers.
Agreed. Yeah.
And yeah, they were literally. And I've seen people come and go. I've seen people who did excessive amounts of all sorts of things. And if they're still around, they've learned their lesson and they typically tell people, don't do what I did. I was so stupid about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jordan mentioned that too. He
Yeah.
was
He
like, if
has.
we just we do a podcast, Jordan and I, and Scott McNally runs the podcast for us, and that was a
Yeah.
question:
Legend, yeah.
what could you go back and redo? And Jordan said that, I wouldn't go as heavy as I did when I first started.
Mm.
So that's just some thoughts on that, and that's why I put out Fortitude Training. It has nothing. There's no like drug talk at all in the book. It's nothing to do with that. It's basically what I've been able to learn about bodybuilding and all the aspects of it over 30 plus years from doing it and also being an academician
Yeah.
and reading a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I would totally agree. The fact that I see a lot of people almost jumping ship before they've learnt enough about just building muscle in general, and then when they do jump ship, they're not maximizing that either. Like the biggest people are maximizing both, so they've already got a huge knowledge on training and nutrition to optimize the goal of muscle gain, and then they just throw in the super supplements and continue to get more and more jacked as a result of that. But they've already built probably incredible solid foundations from just being a natural athlete. And I think also at the same time, people almost they look up to like they almost have the role model of the assisted bodybuilder prior to looking at what's potential, like possibly
Totally.
natural. So they're looking up to like Kai Green before they've seen what's the top naturals are doing. And that does kind of frustrate me, and unfortunately I was very, very similar when I was young. I remember vividly doing my first ever show at like 18, and thinking, oh, I'll just do one natural show to dip my feet in the water, and then I'll just start doing the sort of the other shows. And like as soon as I went to the natural show, I was like, oh, this is possible naturally. I think I'll just work a bit harder naturally first, and spend some good quality time getting to the potential that I've just seen. So like one of my biggest things whenever someone asks me about it is I'm like, get yourself along to a natural show, actually see it in person, what's possible. And then hopefully they're in the mindset where they actually believe it, because a lot of people are like, no, it's not natural. They're all not natural. It's impossible. But they're drug tested. So it's it's frustrating that, but I think it both ways. The point is clear, is that people need to develop the knowledge, whatever route you go. And I have absolutely no discrimination at all against anyone that goes down the other route, as long as they're doing it sensibly and they're doing it with the knowledge, because that people like you, people like Jordan, motivate the hell out of me. Like
right on.
I have absolutely nothing against it whatsoever. Awesome. So I'm aware that we're coming up to an hour, but I would like to ask you a little bit. I know this is probably quite like you can't really be a little bit, but I would like to ask a little bit on your nutrition thoughts, especially that if you could cover sort of more your thoughts around optimizing peri-workout nutrition, and your thoughts maybe behind how people are not optimizing that, because unfortunately that's something that I see, that people aren't really tapping into the potential that they could have with optimizing peri-workout nutrition.
Okay, so yeah, that's a big. Speaking of articles, I have a 3-part article on peri-workout recovery supplementation. So
Okay.
intra-workout drinks
Okay.
on Elite FPS.
I'll find that and link it in the notes as well.
Yeah, I can send it. It's actually, I have on my website, which I think you've been to. I have a list of the things I've written, and it's
Yep.
there. It's a big. It's three articles, so it's a kind of a monster.
Okay.
And I wrote it 2-3 years ago now, so there's probably some things to be added to that. But
Sure.
so the idea is that there's several things that you wanna have in place for recovery from the training stimulus. The idea is not just to create the insult. The idea is to recover from the insult. I mean, you're picking something up and putting it down, picking it up and putting it down, repeatedly doing that. And that's really a nonsensical thing in terms of function. You would never do that if you were like trying to build a house or trying to do anything in the real world. Only example I always give is like maybe if you got someone who wants you to like rearrange the furniture in a room and she or he is really indecisive. So you pick up the couch and you put it down. You pick up the couch and you put it down. But that's why you get sore. It's those long movements that make you really sore.
Yeah.
And essentially we're producing what you could just generically call a muscle callus.
I've heard you use that term before.
Yeah, it's kind of like building a callus on your hand.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to recover from that. Some people, if you've eaten a large meal beforehand, you're going to have the advantages of having elevated insulin, which is highly anti-catabolic.
Okay.
So that's going to slow the muscle breakdown. That's going to favor protein accrual in the muscle cells. Plus, you provide, assuming you ate some protein, you're providing amino acids, and those will further increase the muscle protein synthetic response. And those two main things are what you're going to get from having an influx of nutrients during your workout. You could do that with a big meal before a workout. If you work out for like 2 hours, for instance, and you could end up not having much around by the end of those 2 hours, depending on how much you ate. This is where an intra-workout can be quite advantageous.
Okay.
It's that you find something, and people are using the sort of the newer technology, the highly branched cyclic dextrins, because they have they don't cause any gastric distress in most people.
Uptake
very easily.
quick,
So, that as well. Not a lot of stuff out there in humans actually on that. It's mainly rat data, but it seems like that's the case.
Okay.
Even if you look at the Vitargo literature, this is kind of a side topic, but there are different formulations. They went from a barley to potato starch, I think, or maybe vice versa, and they have data that actually contradicts itself. If you look at their research, and in one case, I think they saw a higher glycemic response. In the other case, they didn't with the different formulations, and they just basically took the information from one study and applied it to presume it was going to work for their newest formulation, which it hasn't been demonstrated in. Like they really like it. It was beyond cherry picking and how they present their data. Anyway, that's a side topic, but so you want to have carbohydrate around. Carbohydrate, of course, is going to provide for some glucose, not as a fuel source per se.
Okay.
But you can replenish glycogen between sets. So you do a set and you rest 2 or 3 minutes, and there's some glycogen resynthesis that happens there. The protein's going to be helpful. Protein plus carbohydrate will further enhance your insulin release. So that's going to have an anti-catabolic effect. So we're increasing the post-exercise protein synthesis, and we're reducing the post-exercise and intra-workout as well, catabolism. And both of those things are going to favor a positive protein balance in the muscle that you train. That's what you want. You're going to want to accrue, workout by workout, more and more muscle myofibrillar protein in those muscle cells. The other thing is, let's say it's the typical chest, deltoid, tricep, maybe ab workout that someone does.
Yeah.
And they train chest first. Hour and a half workout, chest takes a half an hour, then they're done. And then they do deltoids, and then they do triceps, and they do abs. And there's an hour between when they finish chest and when they would have their post-workout. Maybe they chit-chat in the gym, and then you drink that drink, and then you've got absorption delay too.
Yeah.
You're not going to it's not like you're injecting this into a vein.
Injecting whey protein,
it's not going to. You're not doing an amino acid infusion. So you may have an hour and a half before you've actually created that hormonal milieu, that amino acid, hyperamino acidemia in the blood that you want to get all those good things, the elevated glucose. If for your chest, and chest may be the most important muscle group, that's why you trained it first. So what if someone said, okay, after we're done training, I want you to wait an hour and a half before you eat anything? You'd be like, well, oh no, I'm not waiting. But that's essentially what you've done if you train chest first, because your workout lasts longer than chest, that first muscle group that you train. So if you sort of preload by start drinking an intra-workout beforehand, you're ensuring that your post-workout for chest which is actually in the middle of your training session, you've got food available.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
you're eating your chest post-workout meal while you're training your deltoids, triceps, and abs,
Mm-hmm.
and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one reason why that can be helpful. Another thing that I found, this is more of an empirical thing, is that if someone has a certain caloric intake they're trying to match, and a lot of people can't eat very well.
Yeah.
If you schedule basically a meal intra-workout, it's a way to multitask. So maybe you have 2 meals beforehand, and then you give yourself an hour and a half, so you've got an empty stomach when you start your intra-workout. And if you're using highly absorbable like Pepto Pro and highly branched cyclodextrin, something like that.
I use, yeah.
Yeah, that's what most people do. You will adjust for what it's worth. I mean, back in the day, we had people were eating whey concentrate and maltodextrin.
Yeah.
And you might be bloated, but you'll get used to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Stomach does adapt. There's a guy named Joikendroop who's from the Netherlands who's done a lot of this sort of work with, I think I said his name properly, his work with cyclists. And there is some adaptation in terms of your ability to empty your stomach during endurance exercise. And I've noticed that with myself.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I actually had worked up to a 2,000 calorie intra-workout. Just to sort of, I wanted to see, one thing I test my limits, I sort of push past, and I was eating about 6,000 calories a day those days. So I do a 1,000-calorie meal, a 1,000-calorie meal, a 2,000-calorie intra-workout. And of course, then I didn't have to eat afterwards. I could get done, and the way my workouts were timed, I could go and take a nap.
Yeah, you'd need
was exhausted.
Yeah, yeah.
Eat a nap, exactly, yeah. You get pretty tired too. And then, I'd eat my other 2,000-calorie meals.
Yeah.
And that was like, I think I was using I was using whey isolate back then, but you can adjust to those things.
Yeah.
People don't want to, but you can. So there's a way then to get more food in more easily if you make a meal out of your intra-workout.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons to do it. The research, people will look at some reviews and then a meta-analysis that Brad Schoenfeld, he's the biggest name, Alan Aragon was involved.
Yeah.
And that's protein timing. They're not using because there aren't enough data. But they basically find there's no effect of protein timing in terms of quote unquote anabolic window. Yeah, but if you look at the study, I think there were maybe 23 studies, and only 4 of those in the meta-analysis, only 4 of the 23 studies, if I'm getting the numbers right, were with trained individuals.
I see. Yeah.
So, and they tried to run a sub-analysis to see, what's going on with trained folks. But what you have with untrained people is sort of a ceiling effect. You're gonna grow really quickly no matter what you're doing. They're newbie gains.
Yeah, that's true.
How fast can you possibly grow when you're initially growing? Everyone sees that. Eventually, things sort of taper off.
Yeah.
So, would the protein matter? Who knows? There are a couple of good studies out there. Willoughby's done one, and Cribb and Hayes is the other studies, and they've shown a true timing effect from taking in an intra-workout when total calories were not different with the placebo versus in one case they use like a pre and post workout intra-workout. So there's some science to suggest this. That's just 2 studies that were really well done. It's something I see with clients who especially, and they're becoming very rare now because everyone's doing an intra-workout. It's a well-known supplement category.
Sure.
But people who haven't and they start doing that, they notice it right off the bat.
Yeah.
They can tell they feel more recovered. They sense their gains are coming faster in the gym.
Yeah.
It makes a difference. I've unanimously.
I'd say anecdotally as well, with sort of introducing it into my training recently. I did in the past, and then I took it out for a period of time. I think I was in a deficit at the time when I initially took it out because I wanted to actually eat the calories and not drink them. And I was just absolutely starving, so I had to. But I then put it back in recently, and I found just like main sort of effect has been sort of a fluidity of energy throughout the session. So whereas in a like a 2-hour leg session, I'd hit stiff leg deadlifts and I'd hit an absolute wall. Like I'd just like the energy would be sapped from squats and leg press or Smith squats or whatever. I'd just be done, and like the stiff legs would take a little bit of a hit, and then the rest of the session like the leg extensions would be draggy and the leg curls, etc. So but now I can sort of like brute through that and keep going, and probably that's down to just getting some carbohydrates throughout the session, I guess. But it is interesting to see, and I brought it back in because I was listening to quite a lot of your stuff, and I was like, oh, I'll just bring it back in. Same with sort of John Meadows' stuff as well. He seems to be very much behind the Peri-Workout nutrition side of things, for sure.
Yeah, I'm working with John. I'm part of John's company.
Yeah, for
Granite Supplements. So people can find. We've. I'll give a plug at the end. I got a discount code and the whole kit and caboodle. But we've got a recovery Factor X is the main carb containing product that we have that people seem to like. Yeah, you can get it in the EU as well.
Cool.
It's available. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, John favors those. I do. That's the last thing when I diet people down. That's the last. I will almost never remove an intra-workout.
Never pull it. Okay.
That's when never pull. That's when you've got the most volatile muscle turnover. Your protein turnover is so high. It's like you want to get the stimulus from the training and nip that in the bud. That's when you can burn down, so to speak, the most muscle. Is being fasted in that sense. And this is the way I see it, at least. So that's the last thing that ever goes. I keep those high all the way through, and that in the post-workout period. One of the big questions is about diet when we're on the topic is that the diet on the day should match your energy output of that day and what you do. So non-training days, you've got no performance needs, really, getting through your day, which is nothing for most folks relative to training. And your recovery is still paramount. But if you're trying to lose body fat, you got to create a deficit somewhere. The non-training days, go through your day, suffer, be hungry, but you don't got to train. You don't got to do anything except make it through the day. That's easy.
Yeah.
So that's where I put the deficits with most folks. That's where I remove the non-training days. Jordan does the same thing. Jordan and I worked together for a while, so we're on the same page on most things. But most of the time I'm still eating, like I have these fat-free pizzas or these cheese-free pizzas that I eat post-workout. I'll eat those right up to the show.
Yeah, perfect.
I keep all that food intact. So I can recover from my training, and then then I just fall up and deal with it on the non-training days. That's when I'm fat. So
obviously optimizing your performance on the sort of the training days is your priority, because weight training and muscle retention is your priority. So if you can create the deficit on the off days and maximize training performance on the on days, then that makes a lot of sense, right?
If you don't have the training stimulus, you're not going to do well. You're going to lose muscle mass, and if you don't recover from it, you're not going to do well. So those are number 1 and 2 right there.
Awesome. Wow. Awesome, Scott. I've really, really enjoyed this chat. I know that we didn't shift through all the questions we wanted to answer, but for sure this has been incredible, and I'm sure that a load of people will take away some great positives from this. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time, Scott.
Sure. No problem, AJ.
Awesome.
We can do it again, man.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'd love to have you back and shift through some more sort of questions on. I know I had a few more on etc. injuries and things like that. So I'm sure that we'll produce something again in the future. But yeah, thanks again for coming on. Thanks anyone that did listen. And also, if you did listen and you've got either like a question that potentially we'd answer in a future podcast, if we manage to get Scott back on, just pop it in the YouTube comments. Obviously, like the video, share the video if you got anyone that would love to listen as well. And yeah, we'll see you back in episode 30. Thanks again, Scott.
Right on. Thanks, awesome.
AJ. Thanks,
Appreciate
mate.
it.